Hello, friends, and welcome to another recap and reaction to Agatha All Along. Today, we're going to be talking about episode 7, and I am so very excited. But before we can jump into all of our thoughts and feelings, Nicole is going to recap episode 7 for us. Good luck.
uh, a journey we have to go on here. Okay, so Death's Hand in Mine, episode 7, begins with Patti LuPone falling in that Glinda the Good Witch costume that we mentioned last week. We're like, wait a minute, we're missing a costume. And then, don't worry, girls, we got you right at the top. You will see the costume. Before we get any context on that, though, we jump back to Agatha and Billy bickering their way up the road. Billy says what I've been saying all along, which is that I'm suspicious of Agatha's claims about her experience on the road. And honestly, this theme of answering or responding to stuff that we've been talking about in all of our little chats here is just a sign of things to come in this episode. Truly a time. So Billy and Agatha arrive at their next trial, and this time, instead of a house, it's a big-ass witchy castle. And once inside, their costumes are iconic media witches. So Agatha is the Wicked Witch of the West, and Billy is Maleficent. I'm not going to keep this on the whole time. I literally was just like, wait, I have it.
I joined the live and I was like, costumes? I didn't get the memo.
So, like, for the bit, never met a bit to which I would not commit. Anyway, so the trial is tarot this time. Neither of them are really equipped to lead this particular trial, but Billy volunteers to give it a go since he did like read about it in a book once. That's not what he says, but like that is the level of working knowledge that he have here. Anyway, Billy is trying to read for Agatha, but unfortunately the ceiling is covered in swords and the swords keep falling while Billy is doing his reading, kind of implying that he's doing something wrong. Something is incorrect here. And also the ceiling is sinking. So it's a very stressful time to be tested on a book you only kind of remember. He does kind of maybe learn that Agatha has been telling him the truth, but that is assuming that his like read it in a book level of knowledge is accurate, which I don't know. That's a big if. Separated. Billy notes that he wishes that Lilia were there, which, me too. And she could be if you hadn't kicked her off the fucking road, Billy. Alas.
Your own action.
Oh no. We got back to Lilia and Jen walking under the road, and this is where the recapping of the plot of this episode is going to get really murky. It's a little bonkers because up to this point, we have been watching like as Lilia, like in the season, right up to this point, more broadly, we've been watching as Lilia has visions of stuff that is going to happen, and like most of the stuff hasn't happened yet. Some of it has. Like we got the screaming when they recruit her in episode 2, and then the I hated this the first time in the Ouija board trial of episode 5. So there's like, aha, we're starting to put the pieces together. But this episode, here in episode 7, is like the pieces are all finally coming together. And part of how they come together is that the story is told from Lilia's perspective. And Lilia does not experience time linearly. She tells Jen that linear time is an illusion. It makes for really, really interesting storytelling in the episode. But I think it would be more confusing than helpful if I tried to chart the episode in a recap in that sequence. So I'm going to give it to you basically how it happened in linear time. Okay. So to sum up, Lilia spends the episode kind of bouncing around in time, frequently going all the way back to her childhood and her mentor, who we had seen in the haunting episode 3, Jen's trial. In the style of all the trials before, Lilia has to unpack all of her big trauma. And her sort of big trauma is her original big trauma is that she had a vision of all of her coven being wiped out by a fever, and she was not able to stop it. And that like fucked her up so bad that she was like, nope, I'm going to spend the next few centuries just being alone. I don't want this. I don't want my powers. I don't want any of this. So this thing about like not being returned to your full power. In the case of Lilia, it's she essentially said no, thank you to her powers. Is kind of the implication of this episode. Additionally, now she like keeps seeing these visions of her death, like the falling scene at the beginning, and the rapid increase in these little gaps in time also seems to suggest that she's getting closer to the end of her own personal road. And so she's got to process the fact that she can't like stop the bad thing once again. She just has to decide how she meets it. She has to, as her mentor says, decide what to do with the time she has left. And she's also got to accept that being alone sucked, actually. So the loss of her original coven was, she did not respond to that necessarily appropriately. So fortunately she puts all those pieces together and pops back to the very moment that she and Jen wake up under the road and gives Jen a basic rundown of what she's figured out. And it's like, I only have a little bit of time, like real quick, here's what I know. I need you to follow me on the road and like rejoin, because we are sisters in the craft. This leads to the two of them having just like they're bonding and having a like truly so lovely dynamic, possibly the loveliest duo in the show up to this point. I think my favorite duo.
Yes.
We got a lot of fun little duos, but this was my favorite. Lilia and Jen are evading the Seven at the beginning of their time on the road, while also trying to find their way back to the road. I guess their time under the road, and also the trial. Also Lilia tells Jen about Billy's identity somewhere in there in all of this. So for those experiencing time linearly, Billy says, I wish Lilia were here. And then Lilia and Jen promptly burst through a shelf of books. It's honestly pretty dope manifestation on Billy's part, to be honest. Like really incredible.
Especially because again, it was his fault.
It was the consequences of his own actions, and he wished for it to be undone, and then it just was. Yes. Incredible. Once in the trial, Lilia first starts to read for Billy, who wants to know who he is and what he's missing, the magician and reunion, respectively. But the swords and the ceiling keep falling, so something's not working. Something is wrong here, and it turns out that Lilia is meant to read for herself. She is the querent here, which also makes sense. It's her trial. That's kind of that has been the vibe of all of them up to this point. So she has to read for herself. The Queen of Cups. What she was missing was her fucking coven, which also call back. We talked about this, that when she reads off the Three of Pentacles, that's one that we looked up back when that episode mentions it. It's like the teamwork card, but it was ultimately for her, that card. And generally speaking, the cards that she has been reading off throughout were part of this. They have all been for her, basically. What she was missing was her coven. The road ahead is the High Priestess, Jen. Don't know what that means just yet. Their obstacle is the Three of Swords, and the destination is death. This thanks in part to the wibbly wobbly timey wimey reasons, is when Lilia also connects the dots that and formally reveals to the audience that Rio is death. And by way of confirmation, Agatha shrugs and says she likes the bad boys. With the trial completed, Lilia ushers them all out of the room. Jen tries to make her leave first, but she refuses. Oh, she tells gives Agatha when they call you a coward, hit the deck, was her thing. Agatha's like, what the fuck? She's like, go. Gives Dean his book back, and ushers everybody out. Jen's like, I'm not, you got to go first. Lilia pushes her out, tells her she loved being a witch, and then locks them out just in time for the Salem 7 to arrive. She gives this big, dramatic, badass speech about the magic of the road before revealing the tower reversed, which we heard mentioned earlier. That was the thing, but she reverses it, and also reverses the entire room with it. We were confused about the tower. We had a whole little chat last time. We were trying to make sense out of the tower for Billiam, and we were wrong. Yeah. It didn't make sense because it wasn't his fucking card. It was hers. Anyway, so Lilia turns the whole room upside down by reversing the card. The 7 fall and are impaled by swords while Lilia is dangling from the table. And then eventually she lets go and falls as in her vision, though less seemingly more peacefully than she had been previously sort of anticipating and that it was previously feeling. And rather than seeing her fall complete, we see her return to her very first divination lesson with her mentor, because linear time is an illusion. The
The
end.
end. Okay, bye hat. um, did you like it?
I fucking loved this episode. This is the best one so far. I
The
mean, we still have 2 more. We have 2 to
best.
go. So who can say if it is about to get better? But this was the best one.
I
This was the
agree.
best one.
I also really loved it, and I do think that this was the best one so far. And there are so many ways that like this, it improves all of the other
Yeah.
episodes in retrospect.
Yeah.
In like really
Yes.
material ways. So I loved it for that as well. So let's start. I guess there's so much like a lot of different things to talk about with this episode, but I want to start with this as like I can't say her name, Patty
Patty
LuPone's
LuPone.
story and quest, and like her, I don't know, the completion of that, and then ultimately her non-death death, right? Because she lives out of order, so it's
Yeah.
a little bit of like a hopeful thing, but she's gone in this present timeline. So I just said a lot of things, but Patty LuPone's story. How did you feel about the quest?
It's always the great struggle of that half of this where you're like, I have a statement and
Yeah.
I have to turn my statement into a question.
Thoughts?
So many thoughts. I think like this there, I'm sure we'll also kind of get to this too, but like I'm getting ahead of myself. Patty LuPone's story and the non-linear nature of this episode, like very, very intertwined. Part of why I loved the non-linear storytelling in this episode is that it like gives you a sense of just how fucking hard that would be to experience, right? Like for her, like of how like some of those quick cuts where she's like she's trying to say one sentence out loud
Yeah.
and jump to like 4 different places in the timeline, like I can't watch. She'd be like, fuck this. I don't my power. No, I don't want it. This is annoying. So I don't know. I just in there are so many ways in which this did all of the things that the other episodes, all the trials are doing, where you're getting the sort of like the magic of it all, but you're also using this as a vehicle to tell you more about a specific character. Like really great work there. Patty LuPone's whole thing repeatedly has been how much she hates the popular culture portrayals of witches, like a running theme. The fact that the costumes in her trial are those like there are just so many things about that are like just truly amazing. I like and yeah, I don't know. And the whole thing too of her like needing her coven, and like her coven bringing her to that self-acceptance, I think is great.
There was so much about this. I agree that one of the things that I felt during this was like a little frustrated that I actually did not put together that the things that she was blurting out were like a complete sentence, like one connection of
Yes.
things. I was like, oh, it was like right there. It's like it feels like something that I should have put together and didn't quite. So it's like satisfying in a bit of a frustrating way.
Yeah.
I should have noticed. But like a lot of the other reveals were like satisfying, where I was like, okay, I had all of the I didn't necessarily have all of the pieces to like put that together. So it feels satisfying now that it has.
Mhm.
So I also really like started to think a lot about character deaths, because like week over week we've been like, Sharon is dead, maybe she's not, and then Alice died and we were like, oh no, she's dead, and then Patty LuPone and Jen went under the road and we're like, they can't be dead, so like maybe death is not like what's happening on the road, and then here we see Patty LuPone like non-die. So we've been all over the place thinking like kind of guessing at what deaths were final here on the road. But one thing that we said about Alice back on in episode 4, I believe, which was her trial, was that, or after her trial, the next episode, we were like, her story is complete, right? She
Yeah.
went on the road and she like found
She
what
found closure.
she found closure, right? And in her own story. And she
Yes.
had this one big lingering thing about her mother and why her mother left her and like the reason that she stepped away from witchcraft, right? Because of this absence or whatnot. And that whole story really found closure and then she died. And I feel like that is true also for Patty LuPone. There was
Yeah.
like a fullness and a completeness here and like the story being brought to an end and then she also died. I don't know that answers to this point how permanent any of these deaths are.
Sure.
But I feel like this episode made a very, like, I don't know, clear case for this was like the end that she needed to meet at this time, but also time is kind of meaningless for a person who is experiencing life out of time. So I
Yes.
don't know that we will see her in any sort of future iteration or like future stories like this was the point where she stops. That's my guess.
Yeah.
But I do think that there's something to be said about this idea of like if they came to the road to get the thing that they needed most, once that is complete, what does
Right.
that mean for that character? And what we've been kind of seeing is death.
All roads lead to death. All roads lead to
Yeah.
me. It comes for us all.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I rewatched WandaVision this week, and then watched this episode a second time this morning before we hopped on. And I'm like I'm now separately just very curious about Jack Schaefer's like experiences with like death and grief just on a personal level because there's just so much going on here. I don't know. Some of that maybe is just the nature of like what Marvel told her to like that she had to tell in these two stories. But really, really interesting. Yes, that's like the thing that we're kind of circling back on here. Yeah, like you get to the end of your story, you get to the end of the road, and like that's I don't know. Your story is done, and then that's it.
Then so
Yeah.
which kind of goes back to also, well, two things. One is that we get the like official reveal here that Rio is death, and that she is like walking this road with them, kind of, because she keeps disappearing. So like that whole thing. And the other thing is that we kept harping on how Agatha's trial didn't feel complete.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
there is something still open there in a way now that if we're saying that like completeness is sort of like all roads lead to death, the fact that her, and I would say to some extent even Jen, who is still kind of alive and kicking, like their stories haven't felt fully complete and they're the ones here. I don't know. I like this.
Yeah, there's something going on there. I do also, while we are on the subject of Patty LuPone's end in the story, I do also have to claim my win, claim my successful prediction. Self-sacrifice death is what I said last week. So really
Cheers.
Yay. I truly like there are so many things about this that are so it was just so satisfying. It was so satisfying because of the way that like they pinged on different things. And friend of the pod, Paul, posted, tweeted at me on Threads that like it felt like for him watching this that they had been watching our live stream, and like we were making little jokes about this ourselves, that like there's so many ways that there were things that we've been talking about, questions we've been answering, that they were speaking to, and like all of those little jokes aside, like that is just really effective storytelling. Yes. Like they were setting up question, like we were just yapping about what we were seeing, right? And like it was bringing up all of these various questions, speculations, whatever, and like that means that like they properly understood what they were doing to their audience, which is really, you love to see it.
Love to see it. I mean, we are also very good at TV.
We are like really good at TV, to be clear.
But putting that aside, And I do feel like the writers understand the questions that they're crafting and their audience and audience reaction. And we've talked
Yes.
a bunch about pacing here, right? Because each, like some of these, not each of them, but some of these episodes have left me specifically, I think, like, no, I wanted more or
Yeah.
whatnot. So there is a question about how much information they're kind of like metering out. But this, and I said, like, we would have to get to the end to see how this truly feels. And it was really this episode that made me feel like they know what they're doing. And it feels
Yes.
very purposeful in a way that I was like, ooh, so satisfying to be able to have those questions, have those frustrations, like want more. But the show runners and the writers understand like
Right.
what they're doing, and then like answer. And every time it's been like answer it the next time. And so you're like, yes, like that's what I wanted to know. And that experience is
Yes.
so fun, you know?
Yes, totally, totally. So fun, so satisfying. I truly lost my mind at the tower reveal, because we had this a whole conversation. I went back, I also like re-listened to that on like 3 times speed this morning. I was like, what were we saying? What was that conversation? And it was us being like, it didn't really make sense, but well, maybe it's this, and then I don't know. I just
And we talked a lot too about like the different motifs and like the reoccurring themes of the trials, right? And so you have all of the phases of the moon reoccurring, and then we had these like tarot things sort of reoccurring, and so we were like, we're not sure what that is. And for like, yes, the reveal was like chef's
so
kiss,
good.
chef's kiss of like all of I don't know, tying it up into one single character, because that would not have been my guess necessarily. So
No. It I mean, and like it felt that's the other thing too, is that it felt so like plausible to, again, to go back to like the just how like thoughtful the setups were up to this point. Up to last week, like last week was literally the first time that a tarot that we had gotten a card, again, out of its proper context. We didn't know that, but like it was out of its context. We were getting a card essentially misread. But only just barely, at like, and so it still made sense. So like the teamwork card was for Lilia because that's what she needed, but she clocked, like she read it, she in linear time
Mhm.
she read it at the moment that they were getting the team together. So it still made like, and there were like several of those moments up until like, the very last card reveal before the whole thing comes together is the first, like, and so there's something also just so incredible about that too, of
Yes.
like that is your moment to go back to your thing of like where you're like, oh, I should have caught it,
Yeah.
right? Because all the cards, it felt that way. And the very last one before we get to this tarot trial is the first one where you're like, something is not adding up, like the math is not mathing.
And specifically because it was reversed. And so when you learn in this episode why it was reversed, it's like an extra sort of like gut punch of like, that is cinema. Cinema.
Cinema.
Cinema.
Well, okay, no. To be it's not. It's both though. It's both. I mean, so because it's the tower reversed was for Lilia, and it was it. I mean, the whole thing of like acceptance and like that is the. It's the windfall. The tower reversed was the windfall in Lilia's reading for herself. So the windfall was acceptance, basically, and then the reversal to do the best fucking magic trick in the show, in the magic oh my god, it was just so good. Yeah. I feel like girls on TikTok who are listening to some like dramatic song who are like, you're not listening, like you're not hearing you don't think you understand the words.
You understand.
She said the tower reversed.
Do you get it?
Do you get it?
Amazing. I feel like we can't talk about like this, Patty LuPone story and like all of that without what she does not need for me, a rando on the internet. The flowers for Patty LuPone, all of the performances so far have been really great.
Yeah.
And I think in particular that Catherine Han has been a scene stealer in a lot of this. So there's a way that like, she's attracting a lot of the attention. This episode was very like so Lilia focused that like Agatha's in the background. And so it really let Patty LuPone shine in her portrayal of this. Her mannerisms, her inflection, all of the like the confusion that she's like,
Yes.
the heartbreak, the sadness. She like nailed it, I think, from top to bottom. And like her performance throughout has been very good. So it's going to be really sad to lose her as
Yeah.
part of the dynamic. And also, she did not do enough singing. So just,
Yes.
I mean,
Okay, she can't be dead because she has to come back and sing again. Yeah. I agree. That's
Disney,
the
thank
big.
you for bringing her to my screen. She did an excellent job.
Yeah.
Not enough singing.
The thing about this is that it's the one where they first really like put her to use, like there's a way in which she's this I think about this all the time. Also, friend of the pod, my former manager Nick Jenkins is a film school professor and also like car buff, so he'll talk about like having just like a very fancy like high powered sports car that you're keeping in the garage.
Yes.
There's a way in which like that's been that like she's been on the road. She's they had her out there, but like this was the one where they put her on the track. I don't really know enough about sports cars to carry this metaphor.
Yes, there you go. I will say though that is almost part of the like, and I don't know now if I'm just like giving the episode and everything too much credit, but I don't know. It feels this smart, and it's part of the like magic and heartbreak of this all is that it was very easy to dismiss Patty LuPone and her character as just like kind of kooky, right?
Yes.
Shouting things out. She's in the background, she's kind of kooky. You know that something's going on, but it's like not really like front and center or relevant. It feels like it's not as relevant to what's going on. And so in this episode, to see it all come together in a way that is very front and center, but that also like you understand how powerful that like she is in her own
Yes.
right. And then also, I don't know, there is so much like queen imagery with all of this. She is Glinda the Good Witch. The tower. She doesn't get a house. She gets a fucking tower.
Yes.
Queen of Cups. Like there's so much like just like empowerment of this character in this episode that it's like, okay, this was the sports car we were like hiding all along, and this said like vroom vroom bitch, and I was like, yeah.
There's the like meta component of it where up to this point it's like it was easily, I don't know if that's making it sound more negative, but like easily taken for granted as essentially stunt casting of like,
right.
Here's this iconic actress, you all know her, and so like that's we're Marvel. We have money to have her come play this old lady, and like that's sort of it. Not that again, I'm like exaggerating a little bit, but and then this is the one where they're like, okay, don't worry, we cast Patty LuPone for a reason. vroom vroom bitch.
Not the reason of a musical episode, but the people demand it.
The people demand it. Us. The five of us here today.
Okay, there were a bunch of tying of loose ends here. We talked about the tarot cards already, but there were a couple other things sort of answered. Her blurting things and being out of time was also a very big one. She did also answer why she cast the sigil on Billy, which was another thing that we were like back and forth on, like, why would she do that?
Yes.
And we kind of got there, I think.
We got there, I think. And I honestly don't think, even like, because we were also talking about like bigger picture, like her basic reason of, I saw who you were going to be and what you were going to come, and I thought you needed more time, which is like, we were in the neighborhood of that, but also that still leaves it open for it to be like bigger. Like, what did you see that he was going to become?
Can you elaborate?
So like really just like the perfect amount of like, you addressed it, like we got the sort of the moment of the sigil being cast last week. That was like that was itself sort of a big reveal, and then now we're getting the, okay, here's why, basically.
Yes.
Why.
Any other like answered questions or loose end things before we go on to something else?
Something else that I don't know if this is I don't know how much of a loose end this is, but or still is or tied, but we talked last week about the the billium of it all, and like that being sort of an ongoing thing. And I think that it is very interesting in the context of this episode that when given the opportunity to ask a question about anything, that is the very first question he asked.
Yes.
Like that's the thing he wants to know most of all.
I was expecting, is my brother alive? Where's my brother? Like anything associated
towards that. But the thing that is actually nagging at him is that question. And I think about like at the end of the last episode when when he's like, okay, I guess I gotta team up with Agatha, but he mumbles something to himself about how he's not actually that good. And I feel like there's a way in which this question of like who he actually is, and also like what my guess here, I'm veering a little bit into prediction corner, but is that like the answer to the question who this is Billy, this is not, that William died, and that is what made the space for Billy to arrive. But Billy didn't remember being Billy, and so he has now spent the last 3 years being Billy. That's why the thing in the beginning of this episode of like, I have a mom.
Yes.
And like this there's like a tension there, and I feel like this thing about the I'm not that good is basically like a nagging sense of guilt of like around, you know, a feeling like he did something like bad or evil or wrong by existing, essentially. I don't know. That's yeah.
I like when almost brought this up last week, and like as soon as I saw that moment right at the beginning of the episode, I like kicked myself because I was like, oh, I wanted to talk about this, but like the resentment that Billy might feel towards Wanda without having really remembering any part of like what happened before or understanding like her part of the story, which is not to excuse Wanda who has done like some things, you know.
I'll excuse Wanda forever. I don't care, man.
But I mean, like Billy doesn't have the context of like Wanda loves her children, right?
Yes.
And like would do anything for her children, sort of thing. So he doesn't have that context. So like this question of if he's Billy or if he's William is complicated because I also think that William is dead, but like the Billy that exists is fully without context.
Yes.
And he has been living within the confines of William's
life.
He's living the context of William's life.
Yes.
With William's parents and in William's room and his like access to other people. So like I don't think the answer really is that he is William or Billy.
Yes.
Some, you know, like who are you?
Something
like,
else has emerged now. Yes. Yeah.
He's not the Billy of WandaVision, and he is not William, but he is now this like new
something else.
Yes. And I do think that it was. I was sitting there going, "Where's Tom?" You know, like answering for him, like, "Oh, where's Tommy?" He's gonna ask, and when he said Billy, or I was like, "Ooh, okay." Like, there's tension there. There's resentment that we've already seen towards like his mom, or you know, not knowing her and not knowing where she is, not knowing if she's alive or whatnot. So I think that, you know, his story is far from complete, unlike some other of these ones, which is like a cool foil to what this episode was doing as well.
Yes, totally. Yeah.
So Billy was a figment of Wanda's grief, so he doesn't have the context of everything he is outside of Wanda's imagination, right? So he's like, I don't know. He's brand new. He just got here.
He's brand new. He's 3 years old.
He's 3 years old.
It's tough.
It is tough for
no money. No.
He just
imagine the kind of stress he's
literally
under.
Just a baby.
He's literally just a baby. Like very literally just a baby. That is a 3-year-old. You know.
All right. The other thing I wanted to ask everyone about, chat, Nicole, was about the timey-wimey stuff.
Mm-hmm.
This episode, as like told out of order. You know, we'll start there. I think that it was really effective here. I enjoyed the out of order storytelling. How did you guys feel about it? And why did it work here? Especially, I feel like, Nicole, you've talked about not loving timey-wimey stuff always. Maybe, am I making this up?
I feel like you're conflating my dislike of Doctor Who with The origins of wibbly wobbly timey wimey Doctor Who. Yeah, sure. I don't like that. No, I mean, no,
Okay,
no. This is not this is not a
like a
thing.
thing for you. All right.
No.
So how did it work here for you?
I know I loved it. I mean, my thing, I guess, is it's funny. The reason I had that reaction is because I think you've talked about this. You've talked about not liking, particularly in a book where, like, I feel like I clearly like if you're jumping around in time, you're like. I feel like I'm directly quoting from a
Yeah,
review of
yeah,
yours where you're like slamming the brakes on the action, and so you have to be doing that for like there has to be something really really purposeful if you're going to take me out of the action to move me around in time.
yes.
um so anyway, sorry, now that we've
Yeah.
gotten to the provenance of our shared thought, the one brain cell who put it to that task. I loved in the context of this episode because to that point, like, it has to be purposeful, and I think that like it makes a ton of like we've been doing time linear up to this point. All of the previous episodes, we've been doing linear time the way that everybody else is experiencing it. But this episode is Lilia's episode. It's her trial, it's her whatever, and like it makes the most, and like it, it's also the moment where she is all of those pieces are coming together, and so it's not like the kind of thing where it feels like we've information has been deliberately withheld from us or anything like that. Like I don't know, the information, we had the information that was necessary up to this point in the story. We had Lilia didn't have any more information really because she didn't understand. She like all of the blips that we were getting prior to this, she didn't know what they meant either, right? So there was no it's not like
Withholding, yeah.
there was no withholding going on there. But here in this episode, in order to understand how the pieces come together for Lilia and like the experience of the character whose story we are focusing on, like you have to tell it out of order. And I feel like it worked so well and was super effective.
Yeah. I think to your point about like my often repeated criticism of like that jumping around in time in a book, that to me is less about like the trope of like timey-wimey stuff and more about delivery. And so that it is that thing about like if you're jumping around, you're never you can, in some instances you're not spending enough time in one or the other to get like rooted enough or to gain momentum. So it can be like a stop and go sort of thing, in a way that in delivery in a visual medium, it doesn't have that same sense of like cutting and stopping and going, because there is like a visual like through line, right? You're
Yes.
experiencing it all kind of together. So it didn't feel like choppy to me. I mean, choppy,
I don't know. I actually would push back. I think a visual medium can suffer from precisely that same thing that you're describing
I
in
think
a
it
book.
can too, but
And
I
I
think
also think that there's a way in which you could do. I think this works. This thing that this episode did works, is very tailored towards the visual medium.
yes.
Because you can scene set really quickly, and it would be much harder to do on a page. But I don't know. I don't know that like there's a way in which any of this is like exclusively the provenance of like books or
No.
visual media.
I mean, I think that it can be done well in books as well. I've read
Yes.
timey-wimey books that have done it well, and I've seen like, so it is not like I'm not saying that all books do it bad
Yeah,
or
yeah,
all,
yeah.
but it is a delivery thing. And so
Yes.
like, and there are I think that one of the ways to fix it in books, for instance, is to spend like larger chunks in one and the other, so it doesn't feel as jarring as you're like, chopping it up. I think another thing that is like made this very effective is that it left sufficient crumbs.
Yes.
Like there is like a that's what there's like a through line that you're
Yes.
following, where it felt like you're not like living in one space and then another, right? There's like
Yes.
attachment there. And one of those like sort of through lines to me was the fact that like visually you're following a story as well, which again is not saying that like books can't do it well, but that it is like a plus in the column of like doing
Yeah.
it visually, is that you're like able to follow and like invest a little bit more because of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that there are reasons that this got it done very well. And I think that primarily I would put it to like the fact that it was like tying loose ends. It wasn't like timey-wimey from the beginning and leaving us like, it was like dropping the seeds, and then you have this like contained episode of like putting all the pieces together. So it felt really,
Yes.
really satisfying.
Yes.
Yes. Strong guiding hand. I also loved how we got the exposition dump from Patty in the middle, but it was funny and it worked. Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Agreed with all of this. I had another thought that might be leaving my brain. Mm-mm-mm. Oh, I also we talked a little bit about how you had seen like the trailer for a previous episode where they like said Billy's name and people were upset in comments that they
Oh
like
yeah, in the trailer for last week's episode,
yeah.
they said what they included the line, "What does Billy Maximoff want from the road?" And on TikTok specifically, there were so many fucking comments from people being like, "Wow, way to spoil it in a trailer." What do you mean? What do you mean?
Confirmed it. You should see me in a
You
crowd.
should see me in a crowd. Come on. Apparently, it did have me questioning everything I had to say about not liking that needle drop because what the fuck? What do you mean you didn't get it?
My version of that was that this week you had sent me somebody just cut the like sections of the episode together in a linear format.
Yeah.
And like they start the video like I was so confused watching this like episode, but it makes so much more sense if you cut it together this way. And the comments, like the first few were like, what do you mean you're confused? But then I scrolled a little deeper and there were a lot of people going, oh my God, thank you. I was so confused. And I was just like,
I didn't look at I sent it because I was like, oh, this is a neat thing for someone to have done. She makes, there's like one or two observations that she makes throughout that I'm like, well, okay, whatever. But like, I was like, oh, that's like fun that somebody did this. I did not look at the comments. I'm sure it's a truly cursed place.
There were also a few moments here that we got like I mean, it's weird to say this because we were jumping back and forth in time, but that we got like flashbacky things that sort of like remind us, like, hey, remember this happened? And I was like, okay. And like we got the little exposition dump or whatnot. But I feel like, I mean, it was all very well done. I'm not complaining about it, but I also had a feeling of like, oh, somebody needed this. Somebody needed the extra hand holding of like, okay. And I mean, kind of the same with like the big like Rio's death confirmation and stuff. Like I don't know. There are ways that I feel like this did a very good job making sure that everybody was on board and like spelling things out and putting things together. Unfortunately, there are still people out there confused, but we all know what's happening to media literacy right now. But yes, my point is that I do think that there was like a nice, strong guiding hand of like laying out of information and being like, okay, everybody with us, you got it, cool. Like here's what's happening.
Wild.
You started the live stream in your horns. So when we talked a little bit about Glinda the Good Witch, but the aesthetics of the episode, the pop culture callbacks, how did you feel? Any other thoughts there?
I did have one other thought, which is that I loved, so the aesthetics of the episode, you had everybody in their like classic famous witch whatever stuff, which was very much like a direct attack on Patti LuPone specifically because that's a thing she's been complaining about. But then like within the specific choices are really interesting. The like Jen in particular, because her whole thing is she's clearly the most vain of the characters, and so for that to have been her assigned witch, and just that little moment of like, I don't talk about it, I loved.
There's also a way that Jen has said a few things. Like in this episode, she talks about like, aren't you angry or something? She's like, yes, I'm always like upset. Like I'm always angry. Or I'm always frustrated or something along those lines. But Jen also is the one who presents the most like open, friendly sort of exterior, right? Her whole thing was like this, like, MLM sort of skin or whatever it is. Running.
Hey, girly.
Yeah. And her whole thing was like a Stepford Wives sort of trope. So she's the one who like presents the most like put together exterior. But I don't know, there have been ways that have hinted that like internally
there's a simmering rage underneath all of that.
So for her to be like the evil crone, I think is also really funny. I think also, I mean, I loved seeing everybody in their costumes and like the commitment to everybody. I mean, Agatha was like full green, Billy was in full drag, so like it worked. Um, and
The cheekbones fit.
the cheekbones fit. So I really enjoyed all of that. The
I
one,
also really loved the way, just the aesthetics of the castle and the tower itself for a like thematic in terms of it's like, oh, okay, witchy, like the vibe is very witchy, but also like for the tarot trial in particular, like there's so like the aesthetic looked like it was like plucked from sort of iconic tarot card imagery, just
yeah,
sort of like draped about, which was also really cool.
yes. Um, I also wanted to say, oh, about Agatha being the Wicked Witch and like her being like, oh, this is based on me, and Billy being like, prove it or whatnot.
Yes.
I think that tied into like now skepticism about all of the stories that he's heard about Agatha, which is like, he did like later find out that maybe she's telling the truth about some things, but I don't know. It's an interesting question now to think about like what stories about Agatha are true
Yeah.
versus false, and like what part. We also know that she has this like reputation for killing her son, and we know that that is probably not fully the truth of what happened. So
Yeah, yeah.
the reputation that she has is like very big fish in terms
Yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
what actually happened. So I don't know, it like that really cemented the question of like, has Agatha been on the road and how exactly did she make it out? Especially because like, if you need a coven to be on the road and each of the trials are like geared toward that, and she can't read tarot and she can't do any of this other stuff, how did she make it out? uh,
Yes.
I'm like, Billy's onto something here.
Billy's, yes, Billy and us. But also also like just such an iconic and like cool choice too, because like, at this especially now at this like precise moment in media, to have her be the Wicked Witch, like a very, very famously both sides character,
Mhm.
where like which version of this character are you going off of the Wizard of Oz, are you going off of Wicked, like whatever. um Really such a perfect choice.
Yeah. Um, I think that as many of the questions and like loose ends that we tied in this episode, there are still a lot of remaining questions for our
Yeah,
final two episodes. So I had written down some. I put like Billy's "Am I William or am I Billy" as like a question that I feel like I personally have an answer to. We already
I do
talked
too.
about that,
Yes.
but I'm curious to see what the show lands on the side of like answering that question for Billy. Another question is about, I put, will Agatha and Jen die? I'm very unconvinced that Agatha will. I don't know if Jen will.
I don't think Jen will.
So I don't know that. And like my follow up question was like about what are the ends of their stories then on the road, and like how does that fit into like, whether it's like complete or incomplete, like what do they get at the end of the road if they make it out alive?
I feel like Jen, I mean, Jen has like it's like there's like the power block of it all. It's getting her power. It's undoing this the harm that was done to her, is like a big part of it. We also still have not gotten an answer to the question that Agatha introduced in Jen's trial, which is that Agatha left Jen alone because she thought that what Jen was doing was important. What was that? And she's definitely not talking about the skincare shit. She's
Yeah.
clearly talking about, I it feels pretty heavily implied to me that whatever it was that Jen was doing was important, is before she had her power taken from her, that she was doing something important. Well, not only implied, like it has to be, because Agatha's whole thing is taking people's power, and once Jen's power, she's irrelevant to Agatha at that point. But before that, Agatha left her alone because she was doing something of significance. So we still don't know what that is. Like that question remains open. So and she's the high priestess, she's the road ahead. So I feel like she has some sort of the lead, like collective good leadership role for witches still to play. And like that's the thing that's coming at the end of the road for her. She gets her power back and she is able to do whatever the fuck it is that she was trying to do. That is the reason Agatha left her alone. That's my guess.
I think that we've talked a little bit about, or, part of our previous guesses have been about the Young Avengers and Wiccan, and like how much of this will ultimately be the beginning of like a pass the torch situation for Marvel in general.
Yeah, yeah.
And like Jen is the one character out of the coven that feels like she's being set up the most for like more. Uh,
Yeah.
you like you said, some version of like her being the future of like witches or whatnot, or doing
Yeah.
some important work, like that feels true to me. And I like that because I'm really, she hasn't been front and center either, but I think especially this episode, and playing her in a duo with Patty LuPone made her, like, I don't know, made me feel so much more for Jen and interested in like her story and the future of her story. Yeah, so like Jen pushed Patty out of the way to escape in the first trial, and on this trial, she was like, "I'm not leaving without you." So we've been seeing flashes of like
Yes.
Jen as a force for good. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, and that's and that to that end, like that also uh um like the sort of selfishness in the beginning, and like that was a thing for all of these people. Like that's part of why they didn't, that one of many reasons why none of them had a coven kind of going into this, right? Like they had their own kind of reasons for isolating. And in the case of Jen, it's very much like uh I don't know, honestly very similar to Agatha, to be honest, like a level of self-interestedness and like me first and whatever. Whereas Lilia and the cop,
Alice.
Alice, much more coming from a place of like shielding and like self-protection, kind of those two sort of motivations for self-isolating. But anyway, like so part of Jen's journey along the road is this like um learning to give a shit about other people.
Uh,
So
Another sort of like open question is about the Salem 7 to me. I don't know. It felt like is that the end? Did we see them this whole time for them to like be impaled and like kind of that be the end of the Salem 7? Like that doesn't feel right to me, but it also, I don't want to see them to like easily just like come back to life or whatnot, because it feels like it cheapens Patty LuPone's sort of like sacrifice.
sacrifice.
I guess it does like buy them some time or whatever, but that doesn't feel weighty enough. So either way, I'm kind of like, oh, it kind of feels
Mm,
cheap that we would get rid of the Salem 7 that way. But also, if we don't, then like her sacrifice also feels a little.
my guess is that we wiped out most of them, and wounded the. My guess is, so there's seven, and they haven't really been given super distinct personalities beyond their animals or whatever. And so to me, my speculation is that of the seven, like five were wiped out and two were severely injured, and so it's buying them time, so we won't see them in episode 8, but the last two will pop up in episode 9, as like come have made their way out, like something along those lines. Yeah, owl, yeah, the ones who can fly, the bugs, the swarm of bees or whatever, swarm of bees. I feel like, yeah, the flying members of the seven made it out. That's my
Um,
guess.
Coming back to some an earlier comment as well, uh, about Agatha and like her end of the road, like
Yeah.
this idea that Agatha can't defeat death alone. That's why she needs the coven. If like this whole all roads lead to death, the road is leading to death kind of idea is true, then that's an interesting idea about what's at the end for Agatha, or like why she's on this road in the first place. I like that as well. I really do like the idea that like the road just leads to death.
Yeah.
It's really fun for me personally.
Yes. I don't know why. That's why nobody fucking survives it.
Yeah,
I don't know what you
yeah.
thought you were gonna get down here. The thing that was missing was you being parted from your life.
We're like, hey, okay, here's what you need, like closure, and
Yeah.
then you're like,
Here's the last thing, the only thing you were missing before your time on this earth could come to a close.
um,
Yes.
another thing that I wrote down about like an open question and something that's been like purposely teased before us is this question of if Wanda is dead or not. I have a feeling that like whether she is or not is sort of like immaterial to the real thing that's happening here is that Marvel is like keeping its options open.
Yeah.
You're
Yes.
just like maybe who knows if Wanda's
Yes.
dead kind of thing, you know.
Yes. Agreed.
Anything else? What are your remaining questions, if anything else?
I'd let's see. I feel like I could talk about this episode forever. Oh my god, there were just so many little things, so many like little I've been talking about the production throughout, and we didn't talk about it in really in this one beyond like the aesthetics, but loved the ceiling, the like again, cool practical effects continue to be cool. I really desperately, I think this is the one that I messaged you, was like really, really desperately need Disney to make I want like the Witches Road at Hollywood Studio. I don't care what Disney park that you put it in. I will be there. I will be there. I will buy my little Agatha ears and I will walk around and sing the song, and I'll have so much fun. Just really, really like very, very cool. The production on this continues to be cool.
Apologies for bringing up She Who Shall Not Be Named, but if you ever went to Harry Potter World, like previous to not spending money, the way that it's like tucked away, like in the park or whatnot, because you're going into like Diagon Alley, like something like that would be really fun for the road, where you would have to like go through like an offshoot.
Yeah. It's not super clear, but there's like stairs or something like that. There's like a weird stairwell
entrance, and then you're like in the road, and it's like sort of separate from the rest of the park.
Call us,
Disney. Disney.
They're also just like, we talked before about giving Patti LuPone her flowers because this was her sort of very like her centric episode. Catherine Hahn still though managed to really just wild. There's this little moment where Billy makes his little the multiple gay jokes in this really delightful, the leaning all the way in to how gay this show is. Thank you. But when Lilia is like, okay, who am I asking the questions to? And Billy's like, I'm the queer and they got to her. She makes this face, this like, okay.
There are a couple lines here that made me like genuinely LOL. One is when Patti LuPone like comes back to herself and she's like, teenager, and they cut to Jen and she's like, not using
the full name. And the straight we want a straight answer, ask a straight woman, obviously iconic. Yes.
A lot of fun.
Yes, so that's true. No, yes. To Miriam's point, she's not allowed to make that face after making that joke. You're right. Yeah. You can't make that joke and then.
I mean, that's Agatha's whole thing.
That's
though.
true. That actually being a hypocrite, yes.
Yeah, she keeps doing stuff, and then Billy's like, and she's like,
It's only fun when I do it. That is Agatha. You're right.
This episode did make me tear up.
Oh my god, yeah.
I felt really emotional about the end. I felt really emotional when she's like, the cuts are coming faster and she's like starting to put together what's going on, and she's like, I don't know, there's like an urgency to like the episode that like made me really emotional, but it still managed to have these lines and like these moments
like
and
the
like
humor and the levity,
brought the humor as well, which I think is another reason that this was like super, super effective.
Yes. It made me emotional and like tear up a little bit on first watch, but there's so much happening pacing wise that it was like, oh my god, where are we going? When I sat down to rewatch it this morning, I was like, oh my god, I'm gonna cry my makeup off. Like I did this, I should have done that first. I loved it. No. but that's also, and again, like that's kind of going back to her, like her story and her journey, like that is part of the thing, right? Like she resisted it for centuries, was like, no, I don't. She talks in a previous episode about how she got sick of like being chased out of every town for accurately predicting tragedies, in the sense of just like she didn't actually love being a witch for a good long while there, and like that is the sort of big conclusion for her, is to come back around to like coven good, and also how lucky that I got to be a witch.
Yes. Coming back to a question I saw earlier, do you have thoughts on the Westview subway? Is that what we're seeing, like underneath the road?
That was at the very, very beginning of the road, when they in linear time, where they first encounter, when they right after they get up, or the beginning of the under road, when Jen and Lilia wake up, and it's where the seven are coming out of. Is I have no thoughts on it though, really.
And I didn't even like really clock it or whatnot. You did most recently rewatch WandaVision, so I like
sure.
gone from my memory. It'll be interesting to see if that.
Oh, there's no subway in WandaVision. That's not. There's no. Yeah. That's not.
It was just,
that's not part of Wanda's family sitcom aesthetic. Public transportation.
They have the yellow squiggle path for the subway. I don't remember if Rio came out of the subway path or not. Interesting. All right. Any other final thoughts from you, from chat?
We could do this all day. But
this is I can't believe next week is the end either. I'm really excited. I also am still at the place where I'm like very curious, like where else the story is going to go, or like where exactly it's going to end. Like that question of what exactly the story it's telling, I think is still, I mean, it's a little firmer to me now after this episode.
Yeah.
It's still like pretty big, like, okay, where is this going to take me,
Yeah, that was a big thing that we talked about last week, of like where like what's the project, what's the point, what's the thing that this is doing, and like remain optimistic, open to whatever it is, but I feel like that is becoming clearer to me now. Last week there was this sense of like, okay, I've been having fun, I'm enjoying this, I'm along for the ride, but like the sort of WandaVision, very, very clear project at the end there of like, this is about Wanda's grief. It is Wanda's the villain in her own story, to a certain extent there in WandaVision. Like she is the one who was doing all of that, but it's like, it is about like her processing, and like going here, like what's the core, like what's the unifying like theme, message, whatever, and it does seem like there is something in something self-acceptance, and like collaboration.
I also think that this is a very sort of character-driven story for our ensemble, where each of them are resolving something pretty personal.
Yes.
And that feels true. And that collection of things, like that collection of little mini stories, could lead to a place where there is some sort of like passing of the torch, or like, I don't know, this feels like a good place where you could introduce something that could continue on in different areas, which Marvel loves to do. So yeah, it feels like the project is like firming up for me. It could still go like one of many, many different ways, and that's exciting too. But yeah, I don't know. This is such a good episode for my overall feelings of like, I was having fun and I thought it was good, but like I got here and I was like, oh no, this is like great. I love this.
It's also really interesting too, the Agatha All Along WandaVision episode was also episode 7. That was the, so right here, right at the moment, right before you get us into the big 8-9 finish. Yeah. So
well, probably, I mean, this has been our longest episode yet. This episode wasn't particularly long, but it
the Billy episode was last week's, was the longest episode of the show,
of
but
the
this
show.
is our longest live stream.
Live stream. Next week, I imagine that we'll have double as much to say to like try it out. We'll see you guys then. We'll keep to this day and time. And yeah, I'm so excited to finally.
Miriam's right too. There should have been they really stupid. Honestly, come on.
our like continuous thing is like more.
More.
We got a whole theme park plan. We're like more.
Great.
Right. No more. Goodbye.
Bye.